Hello and welcome to a new episode of Ghoulish with me, Max Booth, the host. Ghoulish is a weekly podcast. Well, I, Max Booth, a host, discusses something spooky with a contributor of spookiness. We talk about a variety of topics every week. And this week I am talking about genre tropes with one of my favorite writers of all time, Carmen Maria Machado. Now, if you don't know who Carmen Maria Machado is, you will not living, my friend. She's probably one of the best new writers to begin getting published in the last decade. She has 2 books out right now. She has a collection called Whole Body and Evil Parties, which was a National Book Award finalist, and I believe it's being adapted as a TV show with FX. Really, really good collection. You probably recognize a novelette from the collection called The Husband Stitch. It kind of became an internet sensation a while back. But more recently, she released a non-fiction book called In the Dream House about an abusive relationship she once had, and it's one of the most experimental, unique books I've ever read in my life. And I highly encourage all of you to pick it up because I think it's really special, and I think it's required reading from anyone who has ever been or intends on ever being in a relationship. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. So good. I was surprised and taken aback when she agreed to come on the podcast because, well, no, she's kind of big time. She's big time, guys, and this is a little podcast. I admit I was really nervous when I talked to Carmen, and hopefully I didn't botch the interview too much. I think there's some good content here. Carmen Maria Machado, she's really smart. And she answered the questions I did ask really nicely, and I really can't stress how much I appreciate that she took the time to talk to me about genre tropes and a few other things. Yeah. Why don't we just go ahead and listen to this episode? I wanted to talk to you today about genre tropes because, I mean, anyone who has read your writing should recognize your talent of taking a common storytelling narrative and spinning it into something kind of experimental and unique. So I was hoping we could begin today with you telling me how you would define a trope.
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess I would describe a trope as an expected or familiar storytelling element that appears in certain genres and subgenres, and that readers can often expect, or that can be used to sort of play with the expectations of the reader.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I thought about looking this up ahead of time because we all recognize the word trope, but I had no idea how to define it. But
yeah, no, it's funny to actually I kept wanting to say the word trope in defining the word, which was not helpful, of course. But
no.
Yeah, I feel like thinking very openly about thinking of it as like a series of it's like in the way you talk about genre, it's about series of expectations, basically.
I think sometimes, quite unjustly too, books can be criticized for featuring recognizable tropes, but I think that might be the the thing with tropes. They can always be found if you look hard enough, right? But
Oh, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but I think what matters instead is how the trope is presented. What are your thoughts on
Hmm.
that?
Yeah, I would agree. No, I don't think the use of a trope is inherently bad. I mean, that's just, I mean, one uses tropes in every genre. But it's really about how are you like, are you sinking into them because they're easy or because it feels safe, or are you using it to create leverage or tension or like push back against the reader, or to create like sort of a like an unsettling effect in the reader. I think that's a way more successful use of them. But no, they're not inherently good or bad. I mean, they're sort of neutral in that way. It's just sort of how you use them.
Yeah, neutral. That's a great way to explain that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically about genre tropes, obviously, is you released a new book last year titled "In the Dream House," and although the subject matter is extremely serious, the book also can sometimes read as, I don't know if fun is the right word, but refreshing, refreshing maybe, because of the way you
I think
present each
there's a
chapter.
kind of yeah. Well, there's a kind of levity, I think maybe is the word, is the way of thinking about it, to the content that
Yes.
or to the form that creates kind of a little bit of space and aeration and effervescence in the content, because the content is, as you said, extremely intense and serious. And I think the
Yes.
form creates a kind of playfulness that makes the reading the book more bearable, which is obviously important.
Absolutely, yeah. I
Yeah.
was gonna say fun to begin with, and I thought no, that's the worst way to describe it. Like
Yeah.
one section is written as a choose your own adventure. One is written as a haunted house story. Another one you have subjected through a lens of the unreliable narrator. So I'm just hoping you could walk me through how the style of this book came together.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of for a long time was trying to tell the story that is in this book, um, in a way that made sense to me and in a way that worked. And trying to do it in a straightforward manner was very stressful and really hard. And I don't think I was. It was just very difficult for me to do right or to feel like I was doing it right. Um, and I was thinking a lot about at the time haunted houses, which are a thing that are very interesting to me. Um, and yeah, and I just began to write about to think about like what would it mean to tell this story using the haunted house as a framework, or using using like other genres, not just haunted houses, as a framework. And then it just became the form of the book. And then the more I leaned into that genre, and the more I leaned into thinking about, well, why not generation ship, or why not high fantasy, or why not this, or why not that, like I began to see the ways in which the tropes could sort of be like turned over and run around and sort of like turned around and like unpacked and turned over, or just like manipulated in ways that could create a very interesting effect, and that could also be used to sort of pull new and deeper meaning out of just discussing the events, of the book. And so yeah, and then it just sort of took off from there, and then it really became a kind of engine of the story, which I found super interesting and meaningful.
Yeah, did you like end up breaking down an outline of all the types of narratives you wanted to touch base on as you went along, or how did that come about?
um I I mean, I didn't really, I sort of just had like lists that I was keeping.
Yeah,
Like I had like a notebook just full of ideas and full of like all the genres I could possibly think of, and way more than actually exist in the book, because if I tried to put all of them in, the book would have been like 800 pages long or something. So yeah, so ultimately it was interesting to me, to just sort of write as many as sort of spoke to me, or as many as sort of fit in the book. I mean, and then I combined a bunch of them, because also like tropes. The thing about tropes is they can repeat themselves, or there's overlap within different genres. And so there was some that I ended up combining. Like there were various sort of things going on, and ultimately I don't know, like I got the list that I wanted. But the order, when I was thinking about the order, was more about like how to make this story sort of function best necessarily. Like I don't think I like necessarily combined the tropes together or put them in an order in a way that was, it was more about the story itself as opposed to the tropes.
that makes sense. Any specific tropes that come to mind now that you wanted to include, but for some reason you it just didn't fit correctly.
It's so funny. People keep asking me that, and I know there are some, but I
Yeah.
honestly could not tell you for the life of me what they are. I'd have to like go back and look. I mean, there wasn't anything where I felt like this is too complicated or confusing for them, but it just was like, oh, I can't think of anything good, or like, oh, this if I do this, it kind of repeats itself, like it repeats some other beat of the book that I already have sort of written, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so there was some that I didn't use just because it didn't work, didn't fit.
That makes sense. Would you say you have a favorite trope? And if so, like what would be some good examples of it in published fiction that make the trope really shine? Like I know you talk about haunted houses a lot.
I do. One of my favorite haunted house tropes there's always this like beat in the beginning of a haunted house film or in the beginning of most of them where like the family everything's very easy and everyone's like, moving in or like they're like giggling and laughing and like chatting and sort of having these very like sort of very casual conversations and putting their stuff away and it's like setting up it's sort of meant to create like a sense of tension because it's like oh like everything's about to go wrong so like here we're just seeing everything go right
Hmm.
um and there's something about that I just find very very compelling and I really really like and I've always am very tickled by it and I don't know if I have any like deeper thoughts about it but I'm always like it's that moment in the haunted house narrative where everything is fine.
You just
And
want to scream at them like, "You idiots! It's gonna
yeah,
go bad."
yeah. And like everything's about to go to shit, but you can't do anything about it. So yeah.
Yeah, I tend to get that feeling if anything goes good in my own life. Like, oh no, if this was a movie, this would not last long.
Right, exactly. Right. I think that's why it's so funny because yeah, that it does make you feel like you right that, that is totally the reaction where you're like, what part of the story am I in right now?
This
I
is the
don't
beginning.
know. I know, right?
Now, you've been writing this cool experimental stuff a while now. I mean, the collection you had come out was a fantastic example of how strange and unique you can get. Same with some fiction that hasn't been collected yet, such as the one you wrote in the style of a Kickstarter campaign, which is one of
Oh
my
yeah.
favorite pieces that you've written. How the hell
Hmm.
did that one come about?
That one, insofar as I can remember, because whenever I see new text somewhere, I'm always like, how can I use that like in my practice or whatever? Um, and I think I was just like, oh, a Kickstarter, that would be like an interesting shape for a story. And then John Joseph Adams was like, hey, I'm actually doing a Kickstarter anthology. Like, would you want to contribute? And it was just like really good timing where I was like, actually, I have been having thoughts. I've been having so many thoughts about that. Yes, I will. And then I just did it. So it actually just worked out really well where like they were having a thought and then or he had this project. Then I was like, oh, that actually, I want to try that. And then I wrote the story and I really loved it. And actually the form really worked for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I stumbled across that one to begin with on an app called Great Jones Street.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore.
Rest
But
in peace. I made some good money off that website for about a month, and then they left.
oh no, I know that's so hard. It's so hard. I mean, so many things kind of come and go in that way.
Oh, absolutely. Uh, what was the decision process like with the table of contents with the collection? Like, was this Kickstarter story at one point going to be in the collection?
No. I mean, the collection it sort of has a very specific project about gender, and that story, while I love it, just does not fit in that space. So,
Okay.
so yeah, no, it was never going to be in the book. Maybe at some point I'll put it in something, but I have not yet.
That makes sense. Okay,
So
I got
yeah.
you. What usually comes first, the story itself, or the style in which you present it? Like the example I have is the Law and Order SVU story. Did you just
Mhm.
decide, haha, I would love to write descriptions of this episode, or did you come up with a type of story first?
So I oftentimes I'm operating from from a form. So like the Law and Order story, like it sort of started as a project thinking about episode, um, like episode descriptions or episode titles, or like episode capsule descriptions, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And I began just sort of experimenting and trying, and then eventually. the story began to kind of take shape and the story kind of presented itself to me. But I didn't like start off being like, I'm going to write a story about sexual violence and it will take the form of this story. It was just sort of like, oh, this will be fun. Let's try this. And then I just sort of moved from there. Um, so yeah, so I feel like for a lot of my form stories or stories where there's like a strong formal element, I'm often coming from the form.
That type of style specifically, the Law and Order ones, just seemed like it
Hmm.
was so much fun to write.
It was, it's funny to say that because it's such a grim, like it has so much grim content in it. It's
Yeah.
a pretty intense story, but
Yeah.
it was really fun to write. Um, yeah, it was really fun to write, and yeah, and there was something, and I actually wrote it in a fairly straightforward manner. Like I just sort of rode through, like I sort of went through the episodes more or less linearly the first time I wrote it. Like,
Hmm.
so I don't know. It was definitely fun. It was like a very playful experience. I love writing. I love working on stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, writing should be fun, and I think the way you write a lot of these stories, they really do like tell the reader that hey, this is a fun job.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for coming on and doing this. That's
Oh my,
about
of
all the
course.
questions I had. Uh, how
Yeah.
how can folks find you online?
Oh, I am at Carmen M. Machado on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is carmenmariamachado.com.
Well, fantastic. Thank you once again, and you have a good day.
Thanks so much. You too. Thanks for
All
having me.
right.
Bye.
Bye.